Halo. Oh, enggak. Kalau saya ada, kalau ada nih, saya sudah minta diaktifkan semua. Ya, oke, makasih. Baik, ya, makasih. Mudah-mudahan nggak ada masalah nih. Aduh, ya. Kasih.
Oke, neutral background apa on camera ya?
Selamat pagi para panelis. Karena sebentar lagi acara kita akan dimulai, mungkin bisa mengaktifkan videonya. Say hi kepada para mahasiswa dan mahasiswi yang ingin berpartisipasi pada acara kita pada pagi hari ini. Morning, Prof. Cheng.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Good morning, Prof. Cheng.
Hi,
Prof.
Dr.
Dewi.
Yata.
Good morning,
Good morning, Prof.
everyone.
Tita.
Hi, Prof. Devi.
Hi, Prof. Cheng. How are you?
Hi, Dr. Roman. Still looking young.
He is still young.
Thank you, Prof. Cheng. I thought that you also looks very young, Prof. Cheng.
Pagi Mas Ari, maaf nih kemarin saya share pakai HP, jadi nggak ada passwordnya.
So are all the academic staff vaccinated in Indonesia?
Sorry, Prof. Cheng?
I was just asking whether all the academic staff have been vaccinated in Indonesia.
I think in UI, yes, but I don't know other universities.
Hello, very good morning.
Hi, Ronnie.
Hi, Prof. Cheng, how are you?
Okay.
You have a mustache now.
What is that?
You have a mustache.
I have a message.
No, mustache here.
Oh,
Mustache.
mustache. Oh, yeah. That's right. Yeah. So this is to sing with the Corona period.
Very good morning, Dr. Armita, Dr. Prof. Dewi. Good morning, Dr. Gana, Dr. Tanjung.
Good morning, Dr. Ronnie.
Morning. Dr. Armita, selamat pagi, Dok. So we will start by 9 a.m., right?
Good morning, Dr. Roni.
Good morning, Dok. Apa kabar, Dok?
Baik. Belum sempat ke Bali lagi.
Belum. Pengennya ke sana ketemu dokter lagi. Saya sengaja cari spot yang baik untuk dapat wifi yang bagus. Saya sengaja datang ke lab.
Oh, di lab ini ya?
Aja di lab supaya wifi-nya bagus.
Oh, iya.
Sabtu buka tuh Dr. Ronnie.
Iya, Prof. Jadi dok, kita juga Sabtu kita lagi ngerjain beberapa pekerjaan. Jadi cuma memang kalau di rumah takutnya sinyalnya keganggu. Nanti tiba-tiba ada anak lewat, nggak lucu, dok.
Risiko itu. Kalau saya udah nggak boleh ke kantor soalnya.
Iya. Baik, ini sudah join sama attendinya, kita bisa mulai saja. Dr. Armita, mohon arahan. Dr. Armita?
I think she is having some problems with her connection.
Okay, so should be waiting for a moment. Waiting for.
I'll try to text her.
Okay, surely. So I think better to wait for a moment and then we can start after get her blessing. So, pardon me, Professor Cheng, wait for a little moment. Yes.
Not to worry. Yeah, it's a Saturday, so we're in no hurry.
I love Saturday, but I hate Monday, definitely.
Yeah. So our cases are rising in the last week. So we have a new lockdown because of the Raya next week. So they were a little bit concerned, yeah.
You know, similar like in Indonesia, all the people now start to sneak to go back to their hometown.
Right.
So this bring out many critical issue. So we really worry, honestly, in some point, and some of the people try to escape and find a small route to get back. But definitely majority they cannot really return because there is an official announcement from the government. Yeah, but the case still increases, but not that bad.
Right.
India is terrible, but
Yes.
our country is better, right?
Yeah. Hi, Dr. Hadian.
Dr. Ardian, hello, good morning, Doc.
Good morning. Finally, I can say something because I was admitted as participant. Yeah. Yeah. So, about you, Professor, everything is all right? It's safe? Yeah.
Good morning, Prof. Tirta. You are still mute.
Good morning, Prof. Tirta.
Good morning. Nice to meet you.
Very nice to meet you again, Prof. So happy to see you joining with us in the Zoom meeting. Dr. Armita, can you hear us? So can we start? I just want to get a confirmation first before we.
Dr. Ermita is having problems. She cannot turn on her video. She cannot turn on her mic.
Mic?
So yeah.
Yeah.
So maybe we should proceed because on our schedule already 4 minutes. Okay.
Yes.
I think the participant also already cannot wait for our very interesting guest lecture today. Very good morning, selamat pagi, salam sejahtera buat kita semua. Very good morning for all of us. May God bless our activity today. So thank you so much to Professor Cheng having slotting his schedule in a very tight and busy week maybe. And at the end of the week, it's supposed to be this is family time, but because of your love to physiology and to us in Indonesia, you spend your valuable time with us. So before we invite Professor Cheng to present and then to give us the lecture, I would like to a little bit announce about his background. So Professor Cheng, has a background as a researcher in immunology using human model placenta and investigating mechanism relating to paradoxical successful transplantation in the placental allograft. This is his PhD project, I think, and have a very prominent publication in a very, very, very good journal of physiology field. And most important, he is also a writer of 17 physiology learning textbook. And then has been used in many countries for assessing the student, for giving a lecture, and then also for give the deepness of the physiology aspect and point that we try to target in that 17 subject have been written by Professor Cheng. And I think Professor Cheng is not a new person for all of us here in the Zoom meeting because he is one of the founder and then the initiator of the IMPSQ. Always the quiz that I always waiting every year. Unfortunately, within these 2 years, we cannot do that. There is a pandemic, COVID-19. It's quite difficult to gather all of us here. Again, we were very, very lucky that Indonesian Physiology Society under Dr. Ermita have a very good chance to invite him and give a lecture to 5 university in Indonesia. Join with us today. There is a faculty medicine from 5 big university in Indonesia. Thus, without further ado, I'm very happy to welcome very good friend, my professor senior from University of Malaya, Department of Physiology, Professor Chen Hueming. Time and place is yours, please. We are waiting for your lecture, Prof.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Ronnie. Yeah, so as Ronnie mentioned, my network with the Indonesian colleagues as well as students was very much because of the physiology event that we host every year. And that has come in very well, especially in the last year when I'm stuck at home, as all of you are. So I was still able to continue having informal Zoom classes with medical schools in Indonesia, as well as other countries. So life still carries on. Only difference is that I can sit here in my shorts and with a fairly presentable T-shirt and carry on talking about physiology. So, but today is quite unique, and I thank Dr. Hadian for initiating this together with the society and Professor Ermita to formally have this mega, I call it a mega tutorial. It's never done this before. And I think thanks to the nanoparticle, COVID, now we can have a mega tutorial session with students from 5 universities at the same time. This is quite unique. So I hope that the students will enjoy this. It's not a very long session to cover quite a complex but interesting subject on respiratory physiology. So at the beginning, I was asked to just give a very brief overview of respiratory physiology. And then the second half of this session will basically be what I've been doing in the last year. So informal discussion using questions to interact with the students. And the the organizers have arranged students from various universities to respond. So hopefully, together with the short overview, the big picture, plus the interaction during the question answer, hopefully we can cover most of the essential part of respiratory physiology. So thank you, students, for coming out on a Saturday, on a weekend to sit through this physiology session. So I'll start to screen share. Okay, so let's. Okay, so I've called this respiratory physiology. So I've called this Inspire, this talk. And hopefully this will be an inspiration time for both students and staff from the 5 university. So this is actually a t-shirt that we made during a couple of years ago during our respiratory block. So these are some of the things we do to try to make physiology more interesting. So this was for sale for about 10 ringgit, Malaysian ringgit. So it has this slogan, Inspire Me. And this is another project we did. We customized several physiology marks. So with every system, there's a tagline. So obviously here is physiology inspires. Yeah, okay. So this talk overview was actually given a couple of years ago, pre-COVID days in Semarang, where I had the chance to visit Dr. Hadian's department. So I've just added and modified a few things, and hopefully students will find that useful. So I'm also going to say that those students who are taking notes, don't be in a hurry to copy. You can just write down what you can. So because I will share this PowerPoint with Dr. Hadian, and then to be freely available to all of you, so that you don't have to rush through in case some of the slides are a little bit more complex. Okay, right. So yeah, so the first point about respiratory physiology is that it's all about pressures. There's so many different kinds of pressure. So I call it a pleasurable experience, learning about respiratory physiology. So as a review, I assume that some medical schools are just starting, but this is for your reference then. You have negative pressure breathing, you have the pressure in the alveolar, and then you have this negative pressure outside the alveolar that affects the alveolar expansion, called the intrapleural pressure. And then you have something called transmural pressure. This may not be new because you would have done this in cardiovascular physiology, but this is basically the pressure inside and outside a physiological structure. So in this case, the mural, which is the wall, will be the airways or the wall of the alveolar. And then we also talk about transpulmonary pressure, which is the pressure inside the alveolar. So transpulmonary pressure is basically this two here, the difference between intra-alveolar and intrapleural. And obviously, atmospheric pressure that drives the tidal volume. And in addition, we talk about driving pressure. This is in red, obviously. We're interested also in the fact that the air-blood interface in pulmonary physiology is important, because it is not just airflow, but also blood flow in the pulmonary circulation. So the driving pressure obviously also refers to the pulmonary blood flow. And then recoil pressure, the lung is an elastic tissue, and the chest wall also has its own recoil. And partial pressure obviously is important when we look into the respiratory gases. They're all expressed as partial pressure because this is the amount of dissolved oxygen or dissolved carbon dioxide present in solution. And so we are obviously interested in partial pressure. So we used to tell the students in my medical school that when you describe the dissolved respiratory gases, make sure you don't just say pressure, you must say partial pressure, or else your marks will be partial. Yeah, so, and then mechanical pressure. So we talk about mechanical pressure, and there's something unique in the respiratory system whereby the mechanical pressure actually produces pulmonary vascular dilation. And this affects the pulmonary vascular resistance. Yeah, so this all the pressures, so you can't run away from this. And I think in every system, you need to get used to the definition of these words and be able to use them correctly when you make sentences. So the next slide, I'm just going to highlight something called the recoil forces in understanding some aspect of the mechanics of respiration, recoil pressure. Okay? So this is a cartoon which I found useful. Here you are. Okay, so in the lung, at the end of a normal breath, the volume is called the FRC. So at FRC, functional residual capacity, that volume of FRC is determined by a balance of two opposite forces. The lung being an elastic structure, there's an inward recoil. And this is balanced by the outward opposite recoil of the chest wall. So this balance of two forces determines your FRC. So there's a fair amount of biophysics in respiratory physiology, and this can overwhelm students a little bit. But I think the application here is quite useful from this diagram. So this is the normal FRC. And then we know clinically that in emphysema, your FRC tends to be expanded. And so by looking at this illustration of the balance of forces, this can be explained in this way. Because in emphysema, you have destruction of the elastic tissue. And this means that your elastic recoil is less now. And so that's why the balance of the two forces now shifts to a bigger, larger lung volume. And then the opposite situation is that if you have pulmonary fibrosis, what happens is that you tend to increase the rebound in the fibrotic tissue. So the recoil of the inward recoil is greater. And so in pulmonary fibrosis, an example of a restrictive lung disease, your FRC tends to be lower. So the understanding of this opposite recoil helps you to appreciate the changes in the lung volume. So, so this is piecemeal because we're just highlighting some essential aspect of respiratory physiology. So the next one is on the pulmonary circulation. In the normal curriculum, the cardiovascular system, systemic circulation is always done before the pulmonary circulation. And this is because there are some unique features of the pulmonary circulation which are different from what you see in the systemic blood vessel. And this is mentioned here. So in recent years, we're trying to compile a series of statements made by this Japanese lady. This Japanese lady we have now called Miss Take. Miss Take sounds like a Japanese student, right? Of course, this also sounds like the word mistake. Okay, Miss Take. So hopefully we will have enough of these statements that highlights common errors or misconception, and that hopefully will be useful. So one of the things that we have seen with my own student is that when you look at any equation in physiology, blood pressure is CO times TPR. Generally, in the systemic circulation, you have to interpret things from the right to the left, because these are determinants, meaning if CO changes, if TPR changes, then it affects BP. So strictly, this is not just simple mathematics. Let's take an example. You cannot say if BP increase, CO will increase, because clinically, if you have chronic hypertension, eventually your cardiac output actually decreases. Okay, so always try to explain things from the right to the left. Now, this is in the systemic circulation. Now, when you come to the pulmonary circulation, interestingly, you can now explain things from the left to the right in the pulmonary circulation. And we'll come to this also in the question time. And this is because of the different compliance of the pulmonary vessels. They are more compliant than the systemic vascular vessels. And so if you change this to pulmonary arterial pressure, if there is increase in pulmonary arterial pressure, you can actually stretch just by mechanical pressure the pulmonary vessels and reduce the pulmonary vascular resistance. So in the pulmonary situation, you can explain things from left to right. But in the systemic, this must always be done as far as possible from right to left. So this is a concept which we've noted from the many years of teaching our students. So let's move down to jump to obviously the importance relationship between oxygen and hemoglobin. And this can be a little bit overwhelming when we look at the oxygen hemoglobin dissociation curve. So all students learn this very well. And the first thing we tell the student is that when you look at any graph, first note the axis. What is the x-axis? What is the y-axis? So a couple of years ago, we had this trial where we actually draw the graph for the students in the exam. So the perfect oxyhemoglobin graph was drawn for the student, the sigmoid shape. And then we left the axis blank. So basically the question was label the axis, x-axis and the y-axis. And surprisingly, we found that more than 50% of the students could not label the axis correctly. So which I think highlight to us that an interpretation of the graph requires the students to understand the relationship between the x and the y-axis. Now, one student, whether because he did not know the answer or maybe he had a sense of humor, to the question labeled the x and y-axis, he put x and then y. That was his answer. Anyway, so these are the factors that affects the shift of the curve. If the curve shifts to the right, this is associated with an increase in the P50, which is the affinity index, which is covered in one of the questions. And so the affinity index P50 and the shift of the curve are related. And obviously, there are several factors mentioned here. This is temperature. This is one of the intracellular metabolite in red blood cell that can affect the affinity. And obviously, you have acidity. And also, not mentioned here is obviously the partial pressure of CO2. Now, I try to help students to not to memorize this by giving them a normal scenario. And as long as they remember this normal scenario and remember one or two sentences, I tell them that most of the time they can get it right, whether the curve shifts to the right or left. And this is a scenario in the next slide. So, so I said, think of the exercising muscle. So an exercising muscle is warmer at least, is more acidic, and also has a higher local partial pressure of CO2. This one I think is easy for them to appreciate. And so obviously the temperature is slightly higher in the tissue. The pH is obviously lower in the tissue, and so is the CO2. And then as long as you remember that in the exercise active muscle, you obviously need more oxygen, okay? So if you need more oxygen, then from the point of the tissue, you want to unload more oxygen from the hemoglobin, which means that it would be good if you can decrease the affinity of the hemoglobin to the oxygen. Because from the point of the cell, a decrease in the affinity of the hemoglobin for oxygen is always good. Because normally when students see the word decrease affinity, they might get the impression that, oh, it's bad because you cannot pick up sufficient oxygen. But things are always in many situations, things are always explained from the perspective of the cell. The cell is a final consumer. So if the affinity of hemoglobin for oxygen is decreased, it is always good for the cell. And all these factors in the active muscle, increased temperature, lower pH, and higher PCO2, all increases the unloading of oxygen to the tissue. It decreases the affinity or increases the P50. So once the student memorize and remember this easily to appreciate a normal physiology of exercise, then I think they can easily figure out which way the curve will shift. So it's not, then doesn't become so overwhelming. Yeah. So and Bohr's effect obviously refers to the effect of either pH, decreased pH, or the higher PCO2 in increasing the P50, which means lowering the affinity. So P50 is the minimum partial pressure of oxygen that will give you 50% saturation. So if the index is greater, it means that you need a greater partial pressure to achieve 50%. So the affinity must be less. Yeah. So the next two slides is just some of the things we also do. One is a cartoon. This is just to engage the students on a Saturday morning. Yeah. So this is a cartoon in one of my books on the conversation between Fizzy. Fizzy is a student, and this is the professor with the big brain. So it's Professor Fizzo. I cannot remember now. So Fizzy, he says that, how do you like oxygen transport? I think it's boring. Now, obviously, it's not boring as in boring. Oh, but it should be fascinating. It is. I meant boring as in bore. Yeah. So a lot of oxygen transport, the effect of CO2, the effect of pH is because of Christian Bohr's effect. And then this is one of my favorite email that I did a couple of years ago. I think students will appreciate this who have done respiratory physiology. So this is Bohr's effect. Okay, Bohr is oxygen here at hot meal. This is hydrogen, effect of pH, and the effect of CO2. Yeah. So you can, if you want, have an email competition, and I suppose it stimulates students to. You can only do this if you have understood most of the physiology and simplify it. This is basically a simplification in the email formula of Bohr's effect involving pH and CO2. And you'll be surprised that the students can be very creative. And we saw this last year because we couldn't have the quiz. We had a physiology comic competition online. We had 100 submissions, and the winner was from Spain. And there was many innovative physiology comic, humor, good art, as well as good content. Yeah. So students, given a chance, I think can excel. Okay, let's move now to the interface between the air and the blood. So this is, yeah, so you realize that I'm using recycled paper. So you can see some of the words behind. Anyway, so the air and the blood interface is obviously very important because in understanding respiratory physiology, when you reach the alveolar, you are just at the beginning of your journey because the final destination is whether the oxygenated blood reaches the cells. Okay, so even if you have good oxygenation, but if the blood is not flowing well, it is useless to the cell. So, and obviously you can think of the scenario of the stagnant hypoxia. So in understanding of what is happening between the air-water interface is obviously important. So what is happening here, we have one terminology called the diffusion capacity of oxygen in the lung, simplified to DLO2. L is the lung, DLO2, and there's a formula that students are given. So, so DLO2 is the amount of oxygen that is transferred from the air to the lung. And obviously the main factor besides the total surface area here for exchange is the partial pressure difference of the oxygen. So the next slide is from my book. I just put okay. So so this is yeah, from Sesame Street, I think. So in recent years, and we've actually already had a recent paper submitted, we've actually tried to summarize small pieces of information for students and for also teachers in a geometric form. Okay, so we've called this phi geometry, combination of physiology and geometry. And this is one example talking about the diffusion capacity of oxygen in the lung. Okay, so this is between the air and water interface. As I mentioned, the most important parameter here is the partial pressure of oxygen in the alveolar and the partial pressure of oxygen in the pulmonary capillary. And this is the equation for this is VO2, amount of oxygen transferred across the alveolar capillary membrane over the partial pressure difference in the alveolar air and in the capillary. Yeah, so this is the equation that students will obviously note as they look at that. So now one of the perhaps most complex relationship to consider is obviously what is known as the ventilation perfusion balance. So this is something we do more for medical students, obviously, less maybe for dental students, and obviously for nursing students, we try not to say too much, rather besides giving the main concept. So let's just review quickly. So the ventilation perfusion balance is important because the amount of the value of your partial pressure of oxygen and CO2 in the alveolar is not just determined by ventilation alone. It's actually determined by the ratio between the ventilation and the perfusion. So let's illustrate this with the two extremes. One is in this unventilated alveolar, which is called a shunt. So here you have good blood flow, but you have zero ventilation. So at one extreme of the VQ spectrum, obviously this is zero. So when you have a VQ which is zero, this is defined as a shunt. So this will be an alveolar shunt. So now if you think about the partial pressure of oxygen and the partial pressure of CO2 here, because you no longer have fresh air entering in here, with time, the partial pressure of oxygen and CO2 here will approach the partial pressure of oxygen and CO2 in the venous blood, because there's no fresh air to ventilate and to maintain the normal partial pressure. And so in the alveolar shunt, your partial pressure of oxygen and CO2 here will be 40 and 46, because it equilibrates with the venous partial pressure, which has not been re-ventilated or refreshed. Now in the other extreme, so this is from 0 to affinity, and the normal VQ that we know in the whole lung is, in a normal person, is obviously 0.8. So this will be unperfused dead space. Okay, so this is good ventilation, but there is no blood flow. This can be a local thrombosis, embolus, or it could be a larger area of lung. So here the ventilation is good, but because the blood flow is zero, so the VQ with the value of infinity is related to what is known as a dead space. So you know the anatomical dead space, which is the normal dead space, and the concept there is that the air there still represents unexchanged inspired air. Okay, so in this case, obviously, the air here, because it has not been exchanged, will approach the value of the partial pressure in the inspired air. So this will still be about 150, and it will be zero. Okay, so these are the two extremes of VQ, and just to remind students that as medical students, I think the details of how VQ changes from the apex to the base will be covered by a lecturer. So the next few slides, so that I finish within 20 minutes, is to highlight that when you learn physiology, although you do it modular, respiratory system in this case, you have to eventually integrate it with other systems. So especially for respiratory physiology, there is what we've just said, cardiorespiratory function, because you not only need to oxygenate the blood needs to flow eventually. And so the final destiny where the cells uses oxygen is based on normal oxygenation and normal blood flow. And so when you think about the total delivery of oxygen to the cell, you have to think about oxygenation and cardiac output. So you have to integrate cardiorespiratory physiology. So I'm going to show you in the next slide one equation, and the students, when when you hear the word equation, you already get put off. So in order to engage you, I have brought somebody to introduce to you. Now using Zoom, you can bring your uncle, auntie, your wife and all that. So this morning I decided to bring my grandson. I became a grandfather last September. So he'll be turning 8 months next week. Yeah, okay. So this is an interesting picture. Oh, here you are, yeah. So these are the parents. Yeah, obviously both parents are frontliners in Sabah. So so we're obviously quite anxious sometimes. So obviously they were just look at this picture. So he's actually looking at an anatomy book here. So starting young. So definitely I must put him in front of a physiology textbook. Yeah. But anyway, so this is the equation: cardiorespiratory physiology. The total amount of oxygen delivered to the cells. The unit obviously is ml of oxygen per time. So this is dependent on oxygenation, which gives you the arterial blood oxygen content. But this oxygenator must flow, and so you have to multiply by the cardiac output. So to give some value, roughly is about 20 ml of oxygen per deciliter. Okay, and since cardiac output in the 70 kilogram male adult is 5 liters, you just, since this is per 100 ml, you multiply this by 50. So the normal resting rate of total oxygen delivery is about 1,000 ml of oxygen per minute. So the other integrated function of the respiratory system is obviously together with the renal function. So, and that is obviously critically important when you think about pH balance, acid-base balance, because you have the chemical buffers, which are like the frontliners, the first responders, and then you have the respiratory system that what do you call it? That manages the carbonic acid load, and then you have the renal system that deals with the non-carbonic acid load. So this slide that has this relationship is one of my favorite diagram. Yeah, I'm not sure whether you've seen this, that the pH is related to renal function over respiratory function. Yeah, not many textbooks summarize it in this way, but I think this is quite elegant. So so the pH, obviously you need the chemical buffers, and the most important quantitative chemical buffer is the carbonic, so is the bicarbonate carbonic acid chemical buffer. And for the simple reason is that this chemical buffer, bicarbonate carbonic acid chemical buffer, is linked to two major control systems. And this is the renal system, which deals with the bicarbonate factor, and the respiratory system, which deals with the carbonic acid factor. And I think the details of this will be mentioned. This is one of my favorite cartoon, Kelvin. This is a pun. When you think about the word pH, obviously it has the word P here. So I tell the student that the kidney is not just merely an excretory organ. The amount of solute that you excrete is in response to ECF changes. So for example, the amount of acid that you pee or you wee is in response to acid-base changes in the extracellular fluid. Yeah. So I just have, okay, 2 more slides and then we should be there. Okay, so a good concept to have of CO2. Now CO2 in most people's mind may just be a metabolic waste because it is produced by metabolism. But let me leave this slide with you. It is not just a metabolic waste. In fact, when you look at the arterial content, the total arterial content of CO2 is actually more than oxygen. It's 48 ml per deciliter compared to oxygen. So CO2 is a major chemical controller of normal breathing. It is also a vasodilator, CO2. So the active muscle, by releasing more CO2, automatically vasodilates the blood flow in order to supply more oxygen. And this is a mistake here. This should be Bohr's effect. So please change this. Yeah, this is, so CO2, as we said, is one of the participants of Bohr's effect. And we just mentioned that CO2 is a determinant of ECF blood pH in the in the bicarbonate equation. And then if you think about it ecologically, the CO2 that we breathe out is obviously recycled by the lungs, by the trees. So the respiratory tree is linked to the botanical tree in this overall picture of human ecology. So last two slides. So this is, I'm not sure whether young people now still knows nursery rhyme. This is the popular Jack and Jill where every student learn. This was written. I just leave this with you to read. So another creative way in which you can do this. And I think the announcement has just been sent out because the 18 IMSPQ is still COVID-dated this year. We've sent out information that instead of the online comic that we did last year, this year we're going to have something called the Sounds of Physiology online contest, which will involve music, rap, or whatever. So I think the universities would have been informed about this. So we hope to receive more creative physiology lyrics written to tunes and all that, and so on. Okay. So I leave you with one last slide. This is another way. Some of you, the Decalogue refers to what is known as the 10 Commandments. So in my free time, I've written some of this. You can just read this. So this basically highlights some of the essential facts of physiology. It's not a complete list, but hopefully this will help you in your revision as you work through your respiratory physiology. Okay, thank you very much for listening. I'll pass the time back to Ronnie.
Thank you so much, Prof. Cheng. I do believe that 20 minutes will not be enough. Hello, Prof. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Yeah.
Yeah. So, today we very happy, not only welcoming Prof. Cheng, but we also happy because this lecture could be taken place just because supported by Indonesian Physiology of Society, in order also supported by the bigger one, Federation Oceania Physiology Society, and absolutely our biggest one, the IUPS, International Union of Physiology Science. So I'm very happy, Professor Cheng. I think this is give our student a different perspective of how we understanding physiology with a cartoon, and very interesting. I do believe so. And as information, Prof. Cheng, now in the Zoom line, we already have 542 students join with us. And then we also broadcast this lecture in a YouTube streaming. So thank you so much, Dr. Ermita, for providing all those lines for our students to accessing this information. And I'm very happy also, without support from 5 big universities, the Faculty of Medicine from 5 big universities, that's impossible. I want to say thank you for specifically to University of Indonesia, University of Udayana, University of Diponegoro, University of Sriwijaya, and University of Gadjah Mada. I think they are really prominent supporting us here. I don't think I miss any one of them. There is a 5 university joined with us today, and it's really open to have more larger audience. And I do hear also from the committee that some of the students from the other Faculty of Medicine outside this 5 big university also join with us. So the audience is quite big. Nevertheless, I want to give you a little additional information also to all the students that in this lecture, there is an award for the student who can give the best answer. So we will go to the Q&A session, and I will go to the very first opportunity. I will announce that in this Q&A session, there is a lecturer who will guide the questions and the student, and hearing feedback and questions also from Professor Cheng, definitely. So without further ado, I want to pass the first opportunity to our friends from Udayana University, Dr. Imade Mulyarta. I think I will pass this opportunity to you, and then please, time is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Ronnie. Yeah, my friends from Pajajaran University. Yeah. Thank you for this time, and thank you, Prof. Cheng, for your best lectures. Yeah, and in-depth lecture perspective about the respiratory system. Yeah. Okay, we continue to this sessions. Yeah, Q and A. Yeah, about some statements from Prof. Chang. Yeah. Okay, and for the first statement, yeah, the residual volume is reduced during physical activity. Yeah, we can start, Prof. Chang.
Oh, okay, so shall I share screen, because I've decided to put it on a PowerPoint slide so that it's easier to follow. Shall I do that? Yeah, I've got the questions on PowerPoint slide, and then with a few notes so that I can use that to explain. Is that better? Shall I do that? Okay.
Okay.
Okay. So I will start to share screen.
Wait a moment for question.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, no.
I've got the question, Mulyata. I can share screen.
Yeah. Can you share the
okay, sure. Yeah.
screen?
Okay.
Thank you.
So hang on. I need to. Okay. Here you are. Okay. Yeah. So this is a unique situation where we are having a Q&A session with respondents from different universities. Yeah. So this is www. For me, is asking why, or why, what's wrong, when I give a statement in physiology that appears correct, but if they look at it carefully and are able to explain, then hopefully they can discern the more accurate physiology. So before that, I just want to show you some pictures of representation of students from the few universities, because this network is possible because of the annual quiz. Okay, so here you are. This is obviously 2 years ago in Malaysia. The last quiz was hosted in Jakarta, actually. So this was the last time we host in Malaysia. This is a group of students from Diponegoro and Gajah Mada. You recognize the student. I think they're probably in their final year or 4th year. These two universities were actually perhaps one of the first few teams that joined the physiology quiz in Malaysia. So I just put it up. And then, yeah, I think Mulyata, you recognize yourself here. This was not the same year. This is 1 year, probably 2017. Yeah, 2017. They may have graduated. And the other two teams in bright yellow jacket, always very impressed with this colorful jacket, is from Indonesia. And Indonesia here, and Sriwijaya. Yeah. So, yeah. So this is the first question. So how do you want to do this? Are we waiting for students to unmute and respond? Is that how we're doing this?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Will you please maybe Ernest, yeah, from my students from Udayana, maybe give the response about the number 1, please. Ernest, can you hear me?
Yes. Good morning, Professor. Good morning, Doctor. Can my sound be heard?
Morning. Yeah. Yes, please.
Give me a second. Before I start my answer, I want to introduce myself. My name is Ernest Vincent Yesia Jr. I am from University of Udayana, Faculty of Medicine and Health. I will start my answer. Are my video on?
Yes.
Okay, sorry.
Yes.
Just to make sure. Regarding to the statement, the residual volume is reduced during physical activity. In this statement, we cannot ignore we first must know the 4 standard lung volumes, which are tidal volumes, inspiratory reverse volumes, expiratory reverse volume, and residual volume. Other than 4 standard lung volumes, there are also inspiratory capacity, functional residual capacity, and vital capacity, and total lung capacity. I will not go deeper in all of these volumes. I will go first to residual volumes. Residual volume itself are volumes of air remaining in the lungs after maximum forceful expiration, or can be simplified as volume of air that cannot be expelled. Functional residual capacity, residual volume, and total lung capacity are the lung volumes that cannot be measured by spirometer, which is the tools that we usually use to calculate the other volumes, but can be measured by equation. In order for the equation to be done, one of these three volumes must be known, must be find first.
Sorry to interrupt you, Ernest. Just respond to this question. So this,
yes,
what's wrong? Huh? So this is basically. So why do you think this sentence is incorrect? Yeah, just focus on.
Okay, I will go straight. Just 2 points I want to discuss about this statement. First of all, during physical activity, part of lung that decrease is VCR, functional respiratory capacity, due to increase of respiratory rate and breathing depth, which increase the tidal volume to fulfill taking more oxygen and moving more carbon dioxide. Thus, one of the consequences is decrease of the expiratory volume that directly affects the measurement of VCR. And the second point is, with regard of the definition that has been mentioned before, there's residual volume or volume of air remaining in the lungs after maximum forceful expiration, or simplified as volume of air that cannot be expelled. It is still unsure if residual volume can be changed or not in an instant occurrence of time. But residual volume can be increased or decreased due to the change in following determined factors, which is the strength of the expiratory muscles, inward force of the lung standing, and the outward force of the chest wall. Or in some cases, where I quote directly from the source, inability to forcibly expire and remove air from the lungs. Those are the 2 points I want to give for this segment.
Okay, yeah. Thank you, Ernest, for the for reading around lung volume. Yeah, so you've given quite a long answer. Yeah. So, but just to take up one of your point, which is the main one, and you said that the residual volume is the volume that remains in the lung even after maximally forced expiration. In other words, so the point here is that by that definition that you mentioned, there is always you cannot completely empty your lung. You know, this is a fixed lung volume even after forced expiration. Yeah. So even if you have forced expiration during extreme heavy exercise, you can never reduce your residual volume. Yeah. So basically, it is a fixed value. You cannot reduce it. Okay. Thank you, Ernest. Yeah. So shall we go on to the second question?
Okay, thank you, Ernest, for your response. And the second one is the inspiratory capacity is higher standing up than lying down. Yeah, okay, maybe my students is here. Albert, maybe? Can you hear me? Can you give the response? Maybe? Okay, thank you. Yeah. Yes, please. We cannot hear your voice. Albert. Oh. Albert, can you hear me?
Good morning, doctor.
Good morning. Oh, Vanessa. Okay. Yeah.
Vanessa.
Good morning, Prof. Dr. Cheng Hui Ming from Medicine University Malaya, all lecturers and fellow medical students from across the country, and all participants. Here we are from Udayana University. We'll elaborate on statement number 2. My name is Vanessa Els, and I will be accompanied with my colleague Albert Salim. Now let me start. To measure respiratory volume, there is a diagnostic technique called spirometry by using spirometer. The inspiratory capacity is defined as the amount of air that can be moved into the lungs during a maximal inspiratory effort starting after a normal expiration. The inspiratory capacity is the sum of the inspiratory reserve volume and resting tidal volume. To respond to the statement, various lung volumes and capacities will change by the change of position, including the inspiratory capacity. Pulmonary function improve with more erect posture in both healthy subjects and those with diseases such as lung disease, heart disease, neuromuscular disease, and obesity. Therefore, inspiratory and expiratory volumes increase during standing, will decrease while sitting, and are the lowest in supine position or lying down due to changes in how the abdominal organs affect the diaphragm. This is explained by these factors. The first factor is gravity. Gravity pulling the abdominal contents away from the diaphragm when standing up. Therefore, standing up will increase the volume of the thoracic cavity. In a supine position, the patient's tidal volume, inspiratory reserve volume, expiratory reserve volume will decrease as the abdominal organs press against the diaphragm, limiting its movement. Thus, the vital capacity will decrease when someone is lying down. Maybe the next factor will be explained by my colleague.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity. Let me introduce my name. My name is Albert Salim, and today I will continue the answer of question number 2. So the upright positions provides more advantage to the respiratory muscles, as abdominal contents do not interfere with diaphragm displacement and thus generates higher ventilation pressures. And FVC will be increased in more vertical chest because of the possible reduction in transthoracic pressure. Even in the 45 degrees position, there is less compressive effect of the abdominal wall, which is greater in the 0 degrees horizontal positions. And we've also found that the reduction of this volume is due to in supine position, there is a reduction in alveolar area. In conclusion, theoretically, among all positions, sitting, supine, standing up, the optimum result is gained when the patient is standing up. But practically, we can use in sitting position or standing position, and sitting position is usually preferred and routinely performed. However, the clinician should consider performing this pulmonary function test in other positions in selected patients, such as patients with spinal cord injury. Testing in this supine position may provide important information. And in neuromuscular disorders patient, performing in supine position may help to assess the diaphragmatic function. And the most important thing is that if spirometry will be done again in the future, the patient should be in the same position as the previous examination. And due to that reason, the implication of each position plays an important role in its influence over the pulmonary function test results in maximizing respiratory function when treating patients with various problems and disease. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Vanessa and Albert. Yeah, both of you have been doing your homework. Yeah. So the idea of this question is to try to get students to read around, obviously, and also to be able finally to give the answer. What I would normally say, try to give your reason in not more than 2-3 sentences. I think this will be. Because when you are able to simplify your answers, then it means that you've understood it well. Yeah. So, but thank you for your for doing the assignment. So basically, here you mentioned some pathophysiology and patient situation. Here, basically, all these sentences we're talking about a normal person. So here we're asking if you lie down or stand up, whether your inspiratory capacity is lower or higher. So, so if you do this in the laboratory by using spirometry, you find that actually lying down, the inspiratory capacity is higher, surprisingly. Okay, so this is a little bit complex. Let me explain it with some of these blue notes that I mentioned here. So, if you remember the lecture I gave earlier, the FRC is the lung volume at the end of a normal breath. And this volume, FRC, is a balance between the two forces I just mentioned. Chest wall, outward recall, balanced by the inward recall of the lung. Okay. Now, the main point here is that, as you mentioned in some of your answers there, because of gravity, the diaphragm is more descended, obviously, when you're standing up. So the concept here is that diaphragm is actually considered as part of the chest wall mechanics. That means the chest wall recoil or the diaphragm affects the chest wall recoil. So to simplify the situation, when you are lying down, because the abdominal content compresses slightly on the diaphragm, it begins to reduce the chest wall recoil, because they're all, it's part of it. And once the chest wall recoil is slightly reduced, if you think about the balance between inward recoil of the lung and outward recoil of chest wall, it means now the FRC is slightly smaller because the inward recoil is compared to the reduced outward recoil. And because the FRC is now slightly less, the total lung capacity is FRC plus inspiratory capacity. So since the FRC is less in lying down, that's why your inspiratory capacity is actually slightly bigger. Yeah. So this is a little bit complex, looking at the lung volume relationship, but it is a useful scenario to revise the different lung volume capacity. Yeah. So the main point, as I put it in blue here, is that when you're lying down, your diaphragm, because it's less descended, tends to affect the outward chest wall recoil. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Vanessa.
Thank you, Prof.
Albert. Yeah. So let's move on to question 3.
Yeah, Dr. Denny, if there is still other answer from the student, please, when answer it precisely and short, and then we need to try to catch up the schedule because we're already behind the schedule 5 minutes, but we still give you a chances to finish all the questions and answer. Please, Dr. Denny, back to you.
The question for number 1 and number 2, Dr. Ronnie.
So it's still in Udayana. Udayana still have any questions or not?
Yeah.
To be answered by the student?
Yeah.
So what I
Yeah.
mean is, please finish by Dr. Made for finishing the session, but please make it short. Because after this, we will move to the other university. Please, Dr. Made.
Okay. Okay. We continue. Okay, we continue to, we have, thank you for the answer, Vanessa and Ernest, but Albert, yeah, I have just one question. How about the inspiratory capacity, yeah, compare between standing up, lying down at supine, and a prone position? Can you give the answer, maybe, short answer, maybe, Albert?
Okay, thank you, Doc, for the opportunity. So if it is compared when pronate position, then the other position, the lung volume is the most, the smallest is on the pronate position.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Albert, for your answer. Okay, we continue because the limitation of the time. We continue to the third question. Yeah, will you please, my students, maybe Wilson, maybe? Can you hear me? Wilson, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Doc.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, yes, please.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity. Good morning, Professor and Doctor who are present at this time. My name is Wilson Halim from Udayana University. On this occasion, I will try to answer the third statement. When we're discussing about what's wrong the recoil of the chest with opposite strong recoil, there will be 2 interconnected concepts that play a role in lung elasticity. The first one is compliance, and the second one is elastic recoil. If you want to draw a conclusion from the compliance and elastic recoil, the first conclusion that I can conclude is forces that keep the alveoli open include transmural pressure gradient and pulmonary surfactants. And the second one is forces that drive the alveoli to collapse include the elasticity of the stretched connective tissue fibers of the lung and the surface tension of the alveoli. In the end, based on the brief explanation I explained earlier, why the recoil of the chest always opposes the wrong recoil? Because these two forces are opposing each other. The elastic recoil of the chest wall will always press the lung to always expand, and the elastic recoil of the lung will always press the lung to collapse. And these two forces will always counterclockwise to maintain the volume of the lung. That's why the recoil of the chest always opposes the wrong recoil. Thank you. That's from me, Professor and Doctor.
So William, you're saying that this sentence is correct.
Yes, I can say that the sentence is correct because.
Okay, actually, this sentence have been designed to ask the student why the sentence is wrong. We already told you the sentence is wrong. This is a why, what's wrong exercises. So if I hear you correct, you are saying that the sentence is, that means this sentence is incorrect for some physiological reason. Okay. Yeah, so all these sentences 1 to 22, they are incorrect sentences. And they are designed to ask the students to try to reason out why they are wrong. So, and in doing so, hopefully they will revise some physiology. Okay. So maybe let me just comment on this, question 3. The lung recoil is always inwards. Always inwards, this elastic structure. Whereas the chest wall recoil, it depends on the lung volume. If at FRC, as we noted in the lecture, the chest wall recoil is outwards in the opposite direction to the lung recoil. But if you take a deep inspiration, expanded lung volume, then the chest wall recoil becomes inwards. Because it is a rigid structure, as you stretch the rigid structure, the recoil becomes inwards. So that is why the chest wall recoil is dependent on the lung position, whereas the lung recoil is always inwards. Yeah. So this sentence is incorrect for that reason. Yeah. Okay. So back to you, Mulyata.
Okay, thank you, Prof. Cheng. Yeah, maybe Wilson mean that state positions, maybe, yeah. Okay, we continue. Thank you for your explain, Prof. Cheng. And the last for the number 4, maybe my students, Kevin, can you hear? Can you give the response, maybe? Or Nanda, maybe. Nanda, can you hear? Nanda, can you hear me? Nanda? Something wrong? Or Kevin? Cornelia, maybe?
I'm sorry, Doctor. Nanda still be joining the Zoom for become a panelist.
Yeah, please, Nanda.
Okay, good morning. So I will present some of our opinion on the state, but before that, let me introduce myself. My name is Nanda, one of the students from Udayana University, Faculty of Medicine. Okay, so briefly, at number 4, the statement is about at FRC. The transpulmonary pressure is higher at the base of the lung. Okay, so to answer this question, first, our team think that this statement is incorrect.
Yeah, the statement is already incorrect. We're asking you to explain why it's incorrect.
Yes, okay, I will explain briefly. First, we need to address the definition of transpulmonary pressure. The transpulmonary pressure is defined as difference between alveolar and pleural pressure in the lung. And next, on the FRC state, is reaches when we maximize the exhale passively. So in this state, the chest wall expansion and the pleural elastic recoil capabilities reaches the neutral level. And the correlation between it is when we maximize our exhale passively, so there are no, okay. But in the state of the FRC, the gravity makes the pleural pressure on the apex differ from the base. So the gravity pulls the lung downward, make most of it mass near to the base of parietal pleura. So this creates the positive pressure that makes the base of pleura have less negative pressure than the apex for the pleural pressure. And what about the alveolar pressure? We can assess the alveolar pressure based on the state of respiratory cycle on FRC. The maximal amount of air is exhaled, means no more positive pressure generated by the alveoli. And the inspiration also did not occur yet in this space, means no negative pressure generated by alveoli. Taken together, the alveolar pressure on FRC state is nearly zero. Thus, the transpulmonary pressure on FRC state will be lower on the base of the lung in compared to the apex. So I think that's the reason. So the correct statement is the transpulmonary pressure is lower at the base of the lung compared to the apex. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ananda, for the comprehensive explanation. Yeah, so let's just summarize. Basically, actually, the sentence should be qualified with the word upright lung. Yeah, I should put up, because obviously we are thinking about the effect of gravity on the transpulmonary pressure. So at FRC, where you do not have any air movement, the alveolar pressure is zero. But the intrapleural pressure at different levels at FRC is slightly different because of the effect of gravity. As Ananda said, the base of the lung, the intrapleural pressure is still negative, but less negative than the apex. So if you then if you consider the alveolar pressure and the intrapleural pressure, that means that the transpulmonary pressure is actually higher at the apex. Now, this doesn't mean that the alveolar at the apex is more well ventilated. This is at FRC. Okay, so at FRC, the alveoli at the apex is slightly bigger than the alveoli at the base because of the higher transpulmonary pressure. But the point is that when you take in the next tidal volume, here you are, the next tidal volume, since so respiratory physician has found out that the smaller basal alveoli are actually more compliant than the slightly larger apex alveoli. So that when you take in the next tidal volume, more of the tidal volume actually ventilates the basal alveoli. So this is why we say that at the base of the upright lung, more of the tidal volume ventilates the alveolar structure. Okay, thank you for your contribution.
Okay, thank you, Professor Cheng, for the explanation. And thank you to Dr. Mundiarta.
Okay, thank you, Ananda. Thank you, Prof. Cheng. Okay, and sorry for the extended time, maybe. Yeah, and but next time we get back to the Dr. Roni. Okay, thank you, Dr. Roni.
Thank you so much, Dr. Made. I think
Thank you.
we had very clear discussion and very interesting. Thank you also to Professor Cheng. Professor Cheng and all the students just keep remind and then keep informed that we have a limited duration. So whenever you ask the questions or answer the questions, answer it precisely, efficient, and utilize your time wisely. And then maybe Prof. Cheng, maybe you can give a direct explanation to the student as well.
Sure, yeah.
So, okay, so we'll continue to the next university because we still have 4 universities are waiting for your comment, Professor Cheng. Yeah,
Okay,
really
sure.
excited with this lecture.
Okay.
So I want to invite friends from Sriwijaya University. In this
Okay.
case, our old friend, our senior, our good friend, Associate Professor Dr. Irfanuddin. Please, time is yours. Could you open your mic, Dr. Irfanuddin?
Dr. Roni, the discussion will be led by Dr. Budi.
Oh, Dr. Budi. Okay.
Yeah.
So, Dr. Budi, please, time is yours.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Irfan. Thank you, Dr. Roni. Thank you, Professor Cheng. The next question maybe in the sharing screen share. Okay.
So do you want me to continue my screen share, Dr. Budi?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. So this is just a picture to remind you about that there are 2 components of lung recoil. One is the elasticity, and the other one is surface tension. So,
sorry.
Okay, so this is.
Ernest, Dwi enggak. Stop.
Sorry, Gladys.
Loh, kok menghilang? Oh, panelis. Coba cek ya.
Okay, so back to you, Budi. Yeah, so you have, I think, question 6 to 9.
Okay, for Universitas Sriwijaya student, I think we have 6 questions. And
No, I
the
think
first question.
There are 4.
Okay, Prof.
Question 6 to 9, I think, according to my list.
Yes, I think is the question number 6. Yes?
That's right, yeah.
Okay. I want to Nadia. Nadia, please answer the question number 6. Sorry, Prof. Number 6 is Siti Adira, ya. Siti Adira, please answer the question number 6.
Okay, doctor. I would like to answer the question number 6. The statement of partial pressure of oxygen in expired air is lower than in the alveolar air. So as we know, the alveolar air has the partial pressure about 104 millimeter mercury, whereas the partial pressure of oxygen in the expired air has 116 millimeter mercury. The expired air has the maximum partial pressure because during exhalation, the extra oxygen that could not be inspired earlier in the inspiration also moves out, making its partial pressure more. So the statement would be partial pressure of oxygen in expired air is higher than in the alveolar air. Thank you, doctor.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so so if you see the word expired, you might think that some students think if you see the word expired, you might think that the air has less oxygen. But actually, if you compare the expired partial pressure of oxygen and the alveolar air, actually there's more oxygen in expired air compared to alveolar air. Alveolar air obviously is about 103 or whatever, but expired air actually is slightly higher because each tidal volume, whether inspired or expired, is a mixture of some air in the anatomical dead space, which is unexchanged. And the anatomical dead space, I mentioned here, anatomical dead space air, is actually inspired air. So that is why if you measure the expired air partial pressure of oxygen, it's actually some value between alveolar air and inspired air. Okay. Yeah, please carry on.
Okay, next question. Partial pressure of CO2 in in expired air is higher than in the alveolar air? Okay, student, who want to answer this question? Okay. Your time, Valentina.
Okay. Am I audible? Okay. So I will answer for the point 7. Partial pressure of carbon dioxide in expired air is higher than in alveolar air. So according to the source, for the partial pressure in carbon dioxide in atmosphere is 0.32. Meanwhile, in alveolar is 40. It means that the partial pressure in alveolar is higher than in expired air. So this simply explain how the carbon dioxide will go out from the lungs, since air will go from the high pressure to the low pressure in exhalation mechanism. So that's all my answer. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Florencia. So let me show you another diagram, and I'll move back here. So basically, for oxygen, inspired air is 160, for alveolar is 100, and expired PO2 is somewhere between the two values. So the opposite is the same for CO2. The alveolar air is obviously 40, inspired air for CO2 is 0. So the expired air is actually somewhere between the 0 and 40. Okay, so partial pressure of expired air is obviously lower than for the alveolar air. Okay, so let's move on. Question 8.
Okay, next question. Alveolar air oxygen pressure is determined by alveolar ventilation alone. Is this the statement true or false? Please, the consider student. Okay. Ananda.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Am I available? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Ananda.
Okay, Professor. So the statement is alveolar air, partial pressure oxygen is determined by alveolar ventilation alone. In my opinion, we can look at the alveolar glass equation that is used to calculate alveolar oxygen partial pressure. We can see that this alveolar air partial pressure of oxygen is not only determined by alveolar ventilation alone, it's also determined by atmospheric pressure, or like the partial pressure of water and the fraction of inspired oxygen. Why? Because we can look at the example, like if a person is situated in a high magnitude place, like when the atmospheric pressure is low, there will be like some influence where the partial pressure of oxygen will be lower than sea level places. So the conclusion is this statement is not true because it's not determined by the alveolar ventilation alone. I think that's all about.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Ananda. Yeah. So what you said is correct. That there are many other factors, like you say, at high altitude, that can affect the final partial pressure of the alveolar. Yeah, I think there's nothing wrong in your answer, so that's good. The only thing the thing I wanted to highlight again, as in my lecture, is that your alveolar air PO2 is not just determined by ventilation, but also by the blood flow, the VQ. Okay, so for example, we have just said in the previous set of questions that in the upright lung, your alveoli at the apex are actually less well ventilated. Okay, but the PO2 at the alveoli at the apex actually has a higher PO2. So this sounds a bit strange. Although the alveoli at the apex of the upright lung has less ventilation compared with the base, it still has a higher PO2. So this must mean that the more specific determinant is not just ventilation alone, but the ventilation perfusion ratio, because the VQ at the apex is higher than the VQ at the base. Okay, but of course there are other factors as mentioned by Ananda. But this question was formulated because I wanted to highlight again the importance of the VQ ratio in determining the alveolar partial pressure of oxygen as well as alveolar partial pressure of CO2. Okay, please carry on, Dr. Budi.
Okay, thank you, Professor. And the next question, the next statement, the PVR is one-third that of the systemic vascular resistance. How about this statement? Okay, please.
I would like to answer the question. So the pulmonary vascular resistance is one-third that of the systemic vascular resistance. It is false because yes, indeed PVR is lower than SVR, but it shouldn't be one-third. It should be lower than 1/4. Because if it is more than that, it indicates pulmonary vascular disease. And how do we get the resistance is by the calculation of resistance equals to the changes of the pressure divided by the flow. And then as we can see, we want to know the pulmonary vascular resistance. So we need to know the pressure around the pulmonary circulation, which is the mean systemic, the mean pulmonary artery pressure minus the left atrial pressure, then we divide it by the flow, and the flow should be the cardiac output because cardiac output is the amount of the blood that is being pumped out by the heart per minute, so it's the flow. And then for the systemic vascular resistance, we use the systemic circulation, and then which is the pressure that we are using, it will be the mean systemic arterial pressure, and then we minus it by the right atrial pressure, and then we divide it by the flow, which is the same thing, the cardiac output. And then we check the ratio, and for the question is 1/3 is too high, so it is false. That's from me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Muniati. So 1/3 is too high, so it should be much lower. Is that correct, Muniati? You think it's much lower?
Yeah, I think it should be around like 1/7 or 2%.
Okay, right. Yeah. Okay. So yeah. So the pulmonary, I've illustrated it here as Muniati mentioned. So if you think about the flow is obviously P over R. Now the cardiac output from both the right ventricle, which is actually the pulmonary blood flow, and the left ventricle, which is your systemic blood flow, should be the same because the two pumps are in a circuit. So if you look at this relationship, so in the systemic circulation, roughly mean arterial pressure is 100 divided by TPR, obviously, total peripheral resistance. Whereas the mean pulmonary arterial blood pressure is roughly about 15. And this will be pulmonary vascular resistance. So if you look at this, definitely it is this ratio and this ratio must be equal to the same flow because the cardiac output from the right ventricle is the pulmonary blood flow, which is equal to the cardiac output from the from the left ventricle. So if you look at this, obviously this value here, pulmonary vascular resistance, must be less than 1/3, maybe about, I don't know, almost 1/8 or 1/7. Okay, right. Thank you very much. Okay, I think pass it back to Dr. Budi, or is it other universities coming in?
Then last question, last statement.
Oh yeah, sorry. Is there one more?
Yes, from University of Sriwijaya University student, the pulmonary blood vessels are more elastic than systemic arteries. Okay, Nadia Salsabila.
Okay, thank you for the opportunities. Before I answer the question, let me introduce myself first. Hello everyone. I'm Nadia Salsabila from Sriwijaya University. The pulmonary blood vessels are more elastic than systemic artery. So there are two main types of arteries found in the body. The first artery is the elastic artery, and the second one is the muscular artery. The muscular artery includes anatomical artery. For example, there are the brachial artery, the radial artery, and the last one is the femoral artery, for example. And for the muscular artery, contain more muscle cells in the tunica media layer than the elastic artery. Elastic artery are those nearest the heart. For example, aorta and pulmonary arteries that contain much more elastic tissue in the tunica media than muscular artery. This feature of the elastic artery allows them to maintain a relatively constant pressure gradient despite the constant pumping action of the heart. That's all from me. Thank you.
Okay, so so this sentence is true or false, Nadia?
It's false because
It's false, yeah.
the pulmonary blood vessels, it should be the artery pulmonary.
So are the pulmonary blood vessels less elastic?
The pulmonary blood vessels contain artery and vena. So I think the pulmonary, it should be the artery pulmonary are more elastic than the systemic artery.
Yeah, okay. So the main reason for asking this is that we are back to the concept of the fact that the compliance and its relationship to elasticity. So if a physiological structure is more elastic, it actually has more elastic recoil, and that opposes stretch. So if the blood vessel is more elastic, it also means that it has greater elastic recoil and offers a greater resistance. That means it is less compliant. So in my lecture, I actually mentioned that the pulmonary blood vessels are more compliant than the systemic blood vessel. And this is because it has less elastic tissue, okay? And because of that, remember the equation I mentioned, BP is CO times TPR. Because of the fact that the pulmonary vessels are more compliant, you can actually use that equation in left to right direction, okay? It means pulmonary blood pressure equal to cardiac output times pulmonary vascular resistance can be interpreted in the left to right direction. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Prof.
Okay, finish from Universitas Sriwijaya. Prof. Cheng, thank you. Dr. Roni, I return to you.
Yeah,
thank you, Dr. Roni.
Thank you so much, Dr. Budi and Professor Cheng. I think we are good, and then we still have another 3 universities. For students, don't forget, give your best effort, okay? Because there is an award at the end, you know, sponsored by Elsevier. Elsevier will give you some presents. I think this is very interesting for students. Don't forget, kids, remember, prepare your best answer. I will continue to the next university. This is my senior, also very good professor from Universitas of Indonesia. I want to invite Professor Dr. Dewi Irawati. Please, time and place is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Roni, but I am passing this opportunity to my junior staff, which is Dr. Roman, and he will lead the discussion. Please, Dr. Roman.
Thank you so much, Prof. Please, Dr. Roman, time is yours.
Okay, can you hear my voice, Dr. Roni?
Yes, we can hear.
Yeah, I can hear you, Dr. Roman, please.
Okay, thank you very much for the opportunity, Dr. Roni, Prof. Cheng, and also Prof. Dewi. We are very excited to be participated in this discussion. So without further ado, yes, Dr. Roni, I just want to verify before for the University of Indonesia, it's until number 14 or 15?
I'm at number 14, correct. On my 14, 1-4.
Okay. So yeah, we will answer from the statement number 11 until 14.
Number 14, correct.
Okay.
Number 15 to number 18 will be the other university. This is what I get in my notes. Yeah. So you focus on number 11 to number 14, Dr. Roman.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Roni. So for the 11th statement, I would like to invite Muhammad Rian Fadilah, okay, to respond. So Muhammad Rian Fadilah, the time is yours.
Okay, thank you, Doc. My name is Muhammad Rian Fadilah. You can call me Ryan. I'm from FMUI, and I'm going to answer the question number 11. This statement is incorrect because despite the fusion coefficient of the CO2 is higher than O2, but the partial pressure of CO2 is so little that the diffusion rate according to the diffusion rate equation, CO2 is still far less diffused than O2 in the alveolar capillary membrane. So that's our answer, Prof.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. So these are some values that just for the students to take note. So in red here at the bottom, if you can see, I've just given the values for oxygen. So so normally 5 ml of oxygen per 100 ml is oxygenated or extracted at the cells. Okay. So and if you multiply that by the cardiac output, which is 5 liters. So you multiply that by 50 because it's per 100 ml. So this is the normal resting rate of oxygen extraction by the cells, which is also the same as the normal rate of oxygenation at the lungs because it should be comparable. So for CO2, it's just slightly less. It's about 4 ml of CO2 per 100 ml of blood. So the value that you normally see in textbook is that for CO2, the rate of CO2 removal is 200 ml of CO2 per minute. Yeah. Okay. Okay, thank you, Ryan.
You're welcome, Prof.
Okay, thank you very much, Ryan. So now for the next statement, number 13. Oh, sorry, number 12 now. So I would like to invite for this time Marietta Gladys to respond. So Marietta Gladys, the Zoom is yours.
Hello, doctors and professor.
Hi, Marietta.
Hi, Prof. My name is Marietta Gladys, called by Gladys, and for the number 12, our question is false. The correction is the hemoglobin oxygen saturation is actually reduced by 25% after tissue extraction. So in the resting condition before the tissue extraction, hemoglobin oxygen saturation is around 100%. And after the tissue extraction, it decreases to 75% with a partial pressure of oxygen of 40 millimeters mercury. However, the hemoglobin oxygen saturation can be reduced to 50% if it is in exercise condition, which is due to increase of partial pressure of carbon dioxide, temperature, and decrease of pH, called the shifts to the right. Thank you.
Thank you, Marietta. Yeah. Yeah. So the normal resting extraction is only 25%. So this makes the point that even though we call the venous blood deoxygenated blood, it's not the same meaning as oxygen deficient. It's still 75% saturated in the venous blood, which has a partial pressure of 40. And this is because of the unusual relationship between oxygen and hemoglobin, so that even at the partial pressure of 60, the saturation is still 90%. Yeah, so this is wrong because you only extract 25%. So which means that there's still a lot of reserve in the venous blood in terms of the oxygen content. Yeah, yeah. If you can hear the noise, it's because my neighbor is cutting his grass. Sorry, I just closed the door so that the noise is less. Okay, please carry on, Roman.
Okay, thank you, Prof. Cheng. So now for statement number 13. So this time I would like to invite Muhammad Syaiful Akbar. Okay, Muhammad Syaiful Akbar, the stage is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. Beforehand, I want to express gratitude for the opportunities. And the question is, the statement is, the blood oxygen content is increased by 50% after lung oxygenation. And in my personally, I think it is wrong because the differential between SaO2 in artery and vein will not excess 50%. According to the last question, it is somewhere between 25%. So the lung oxygenation will not increase beyond that number. I think that's all from me. Thank you very much.
Yeah, so yeah, sorry because of the noise of the grass cutting. So how many percent do you think is increased by, Muhammad Syaiful?
I think according to my prior knowledge, I think it is between 25 to 30%.
Yeah, so it's the same thing. So if the extraction rate at the tissue is 25%, then you can imagine that the oxygenation rate is also 25% because it's dependent on the partial pressure difference. Yeah, so it's about 25%. Okay, thank you. We can move on, Noman.
Okay, thank you very much, Syaiful Akbar. And now for number 14. Okay, now I would like to invite Valerie Josephine to respond. Okay, Valerie, the forum is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, doctors and professors. So the reason why number 14 is incorrect because the oxygen partial pressure is a whole different compartment compared to the hemoglobin bound oxygen. The partial pressure determines the amount of oxygen which will be dissolved in the blood. Meanwhile, the oxygen bound to hemoglobin does not dissolve into the blood, but it's inside the red blood cell itself. So it's different. Thank you very much for the chance.
Yeah, okay. So the concept here is that the cause and effect is important in physiology. So if you look at the oxyhemoglobin dissociation curve, you find that the x-axis is the first variable, and then the y-axis is the second variable, which is the hemoglobin oxygen saturation. So the sentence would be correct if this was the other way around. Okay, it means the partial pressure of oxygen determines the amount of hemoglobin oxygen saturation, not the other way around. Okay, yeah. Thank you, Valerie. Yeah.
Okay, so I think from University Indonesia is until number 14. So thank you very much for the feedback, Prof. Cheng. And maybe I return the Zoom to you, Dr. Roni. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Roman and Franz from UI. Thank you. Thank you so much for very good answer and concise. And then I will continue to Franz from Gadjah Mada University. In these cases, I want to invite, there is a two person in my notes. There is Dr. Rahmaning Marasabirin and Dr. Siswanto. So I will give the time and place to you. The floors, please have it taken by you, please.
Thank you, Dr. Rodi, for the opportunity, and also Prof. Cheng and all the panelists. Can you hear my voice clearly?
Yes, I can, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Okay, my student from Universitas Gadjah Mada, this is our turn. You already read the statement number 15. Please, is there any one of you that would give your opinion about this statement, please? Is there any one of you want to give your opinion? Hello? Please raise your hand. Okay. Maybe Azaki, maybe you can try to give your opinion. Azaki? Hello? Please raise your hand. Or maybe the other student, maybe Mikhail or Zaki or Hilma, you can try. Mihail, please. Please raise your hand so the committee will allow you to join.
Assalamualaikum, Doctor. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi.
Okay. Thank you for the time, Prof. Cheng and Mrs. Rahmaningsih. Let me introduce myself. My name is Azakinanta Boga. I want to answer the statement number 15 about change in the partial pressure of carbon dioxide in venous blood inversely change in the plasma bicarbonate concentration. Okay, I think it is false because change in the carbon dioxide concentration will make the change in the body acid-base balance. It is explains about the correlation between respiratory and excretion in the renal system. If carbon dioxide increase, it will increase the blood acidity. It is called respiratory acidosis. Carbon dioxide can increase the body acidity because it can react with water and be catalyzed by carbonic anhydrase enzyme, so it can be changed into carbonic acid. Body will control it by decreasing the bicarbonate excretion, so it could control body acidity and increase the bicarbonate concentration. This mechanism is called bicarbonate buffer system. So my conclusion is if carbon dioxide increase, it will make the bicarbonate concentration increase too, not inversely. Thank you for the time.
Yeah, thank you, Azaki. Yeah, so I think you will remember from your transport of CO2 lecture that as the partial pressure of CO2 increases, it's actually converted by the carbonic anhydrase into the major form that is carried, which is bicarbonate. Okay, so it's not inversely related. Increase in CO2 is actually, you can say, proportionally related to the plasma bicarbonate concentration. So anyway, this is just another diagram to show you that the content of CO2 is in three forms, and the main form is actually bicarbonate. Some is dissolved, some is bound to hemoglobin as carbamino. Okay, so this is just to show you that at any one time, this is a hemoglobin triad. You have actually oxygen, CO2, and hydrogen ion bound to hemoglobin. So as we have seen that when you use the word deoxygenated hemoglobin, it still has 75% saturation of oxygen. So in venous blood, you still have oxygen, you definitely have CO2, and also you have the protons that is bound to hemoglobin. So this is the interesting triad relationship in arterial blood as well as in venous blood. So let's continue with the rest of the question. Question 16, I think.
Yes, okay. From Universitas Gadjah Mada, we'll answer number 16 until 18. So for number 16, is any one of you, please come up to the Zoom and answer this statement, give your opinion. Maybe Zaki, have you joined us? Have you joined the Zoom?
Okay, Dr. Rahma, I have joined Zoom.
Hi, Zaki.
Please, Zaki.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity. Good morning, Professor Cheng, doctors and lecturers, and fellow university colleagues from other universities. I will go ahead and try to answer number 16 to the best of my comprehension. So why do I think this is false, or why is the statement false? Is because based on what I read, hypoxia will result in two in one of the many things it will result in is First, it will increase the blood acidity through the increase of lactic acid production by anaerobic anaerobic cellular respiration. And second, it will also increase the levels of biphosphoglyceric acid. These two things will then result in the decreased affinity of the hemoglobin and oxygen binding, and the consequent shift of the dissociation curve to the right, and also the increase in the P50 index. So the statement is false because the correct one should be hypoxia decreases the hemoglobin oxygen binding affinity and increases the P50 index. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Zaki, for the complete answer. Yeah, so so when I wrote this question, I wasn't thinking along the line of what Zaki mentioned, but what he says is true. Indirectly, if you have hypoxia, eventually you can get, for example, lactic acidosis, and you can also have the compensatory 2,3-DPG, as Zaki mentioned. So both of these decrease pH as well as increase the 2,3-DPG will definitely increase the P50, shift the curve to the right. So this second part is correct. And because the sentence also says, what is that? Increases the affinity, that is wrong, because it should be decreased affinity, helps to unload more oxygen, so that compensates for the hypoxic situation. Yeah, so thank you, Zaki, for the answer.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Professor, for the explanation.
Thank you, Prof. Thank you, Zaki. So we will move to the next question, number 17. I will invite Hilma. Do you hear me? Have you joined the Zoom? Hello, Hilma.
Hello.
Yeah, Hilma,
Okay.
please give your opinion.
Hello, good morning, Prof. Chang, lecturers, and all friends. Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Hilma, a medical student from Universitas Gadjah Mada, and I will share my thoughts about the number 17. Okay, so number 17, this statement is incorrect. The correct statement for number 17 is during stagnant hypoxia, only venous PO2 changes. Meanwhile, the arterial PO2 remains unchanged. So the stagnant hypoxia is caused by the low blood flow. Previously, if I'm not mistaken, the professor has mentioned that thrombosis may be the cause of the disturbance in the blood flow. Since the blood flow is low, it means that the blood that flows to the tissue is only a little or decreases. Therefore, the PO2 in the tissue also becoming low. Because the PO2 in the tissue is low when the diffusion process between the capillary and the tissue happen, the PO2 of the vein will also becoming low. This is because the diffusion that occurs on This is because the diffusion occurs until the PO2 in the vein reach the equilibrium with the PO2 in the tissue. This is what caused the venous PO2 to change and becoming lower. And the arterial PO2 does not change because there was no problem in the previous processes, such as the ventilation and the diffusion of gases between the alveoli and the capillaries in the lungs. That's all my thoughts. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Right, thank you, Hilma, for the good response. Yeah, so basically, as we said, the hypoxia is always defined by the cell. So you can say this is a cell-free definition by the cell. So even though the oxygenation may be good, if the blood flow is not as good, then in terms of the rate of delivery of oxygen to the tissue, it may not be sufficient. And so we call this stagnant hypoxia. So obviously the slower perfusion at the tissue allows more extraction in order to compensate, as Hilma said. And so you can expect the venous PO2 to be reduced, although the arterial PO2 is unchanged. So in the opposite situation, I think students may also know that if the cells cannot use oxygen, a situation when you have metabolic poison called histotoxic hypoxia, then the venous PO2 actually increases. Yeah, because the oxygen is not being used. So when you see a high venous PO2 and the arterial PO2 is normal, you can actually imply that there may be some cell inhibitor, the metabolic inhibition of cell usage of oxygen. Right, thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof.
Right,
Okay.
we can move on.
Thank you, Hilma. So we will have the last question for Universitas Gadjah Mada, number 18. I will invite Mikhail. Please, Mikhail, give your opinion about this number. Have you joined us, Mikhail?
Yeah. Hello.
Hello.
Good morning, Professor and Dr. Rahma. Thank you for the opportunity. So yeah, I would like to answer for the statement number 18. Increased metabolic carbon dioxide is the drive for hyperventilation during exercise. Yeah, I think it's incorrect. In my opinion, the reason of hyperventilating is the increase of ratio between partial pressure of carbon dioxide and oxygen in the body. When we are doing exercise, the level of partial pressure of carbon dioxide will rise, while the partial pressure of oxygen will decrease. Yeah, I think that's all from my answer.
Yeah,
Thank
okay.
you.
Yeah, so this is an interesting question for those interested in exercise physiology. So yeah, so we normally mention this at the end of the lecture because at the initial part, we obviously tell the students the main 3 stimulus for ventilation is obviously increase CO2, decrease oxygen, or decrease pH. Okay, these are the 3 main stimulus for the chemosensing. But when they measure the changes in all these 3 parameters during exercise, we're talking about not extreme exercise. Surprisingly, the partial pressure of CO2, partial pressure of oxygen, and even the pH actually remains relatively constant. This is if we measure maybe every 10-15 minutes. So obviously, from the point of exercise physiologists, they think that there may be multi-efferent or factorial input to maintain the increase in the ventilation during exercise. So for example, I put it here in brown. They also including, for example, sensory receptors from the muscle. This may be some of your proprioceptors that may be sending efferent impulses to the brainstem to stimulate respiration. And in more recent years, there may be what is known as metabosensory receptors. In other words, changes in the chemical environment of the active muscle may also stimulate. These are skeletal chemoreceptors, if you can call them. And this also send impulses to the brainstem in order to sustain the higher rate of ventilation. So when we think about what actually maintains or sustains hyperventilation, it is not just one single parameter. And anyway, if you measure the PCO2, it's actually relatively constant, even in arterial blood. It's about 40 still. So what they think is that, I haven't kept up with the literature, but maybe if you have a more sensitive instrumentation, and if you can measure maybe minute by minute changes in the partial pressure of the gases, maybe you can see some fluctuation. And maybe it is the oscillatory changes in the CO2 and O2, and maybe even in the pH, which if you can measure in the closer timeline, that also contributes to the increased ventilation. So, so this sentence was written because just to highlight for the student that in the area of exercise physiology, where you obviously have hyperventilation, there are actually many multiple inputs, and added to the fact that the level of PCO2, PO2, and pH actually remains relatively constant, except in heavy exercise where you do get metabolic acidosis, and that tends to stimulate a respiratory alkalosis. Yeah, but anyway, this is an interesting point to make, that in exercise physiology, there may be, the situation may be more complex, okay, than the single factor stimulation. Okay, thank you, Michael. Yeah. So let's move on.
Thank you, Professor.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think for Universitas Gadjah Mada is enough. So I will return the Zoom to Dr. Roni. Please, Dr. Roni.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Rahma, for guiding us and students from Gadjah Mada University. Next, Professor, but not least, our friends, our good friends. This is our fellows from Dr. Hardian from Universitas Diponegoro, Semarang. So before we continue with the last 4 questions, apologize, represent of Indonesian Physiology Society from Dr. Anita. We extend a little bit the time, so we are so sorry, Professor Cheng. We hope that we can finish the last 4 questions.
It's okay, no worries. Yeah.
So sorry. Okay, so I will invite friends from Universitas Diponegoro. Now will be represented by Dr. Gana Adiaksa and Dr. Tanjung. So Dr. Gana, Dr. Tanjung, time is yours. Please guide your student. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Tony. Good morning, Prof. Cheng. Good morning, everyone. Now our turn, the last session from Diponegoro University. And then from the question number 19, I will ask Fatgam Hamis to answer it. Please answer it whether it is correct or incorrect, and then try to explain it briefly. Okay. Fatgam? Fatgam Hamis?
Is my mic on?
Yes. Okay. We can hear you. Go on.
Okay, I will start my camera first. Okay. Thank you for the time.
Hi, Fagam.
Good morning, the Honorable Prof. Cheng, the Honorable Lecturer and Doctor, and fellow friend from other Faculty of Medicine. I'm speaking here representing the Diponegoro University to answer question number 19. Okay. The statement is increased oxygenation is proportionate to increase alveolar ventilation. I will say this wrong because alveolar ventilation is affect the volume of the air and entering and leaving the alveoli, but oxygenation is not affected by the volume that enter and leave, because from what I learned, oxygenation is affected by area of diffusion in alveoli, diffusion coefficient, diffusion membrane thickness, and the difference of the partial pressure of the gas passing through the diffusion membrane. Okay, that's all for me. Thank you for the chance.
Right, thank you, Fagam, for the contribution. Yeah, so the main point to make here, which we have also mentioned, is that if you think about the oxyhemoglobin dissociation curve, even at 60 millimeter mercury, you're already 90% saturated. So even the increased ventilation does not actually significantly increase oxygenation. So the other factor, obviously, there's something called perfusion limited oxygenation in the lung. That means if you want to increase greater oxygenation per time, you just increase the pulmonary blood flow, because the oxygenation is quite easily saturated. It's already almost 90, in the venous blood that enters the lung is already 75% saturated. So the increase in hyperventilation, the primary purpose is not to increase oxygenation. Okay, the primary purpose, as I mentioned here in blue, is actually to remove CO2. So when you have hyperventilation during exercise, actually the concept is that the more important purpose is to remove the CO2, because accumulation of CO2 is obviously causes hypercapnia. Whereas the oxygenation is already quite well achieved by the special property of hemoglobin with oxygen. So, so you don't actually have a proportional increase in oxygenation when you have higher ventilation. Main purpose of hyperventilation is to prevent hypercapnia. Right. Thank you, Fagam. We can move on.
Okay, thank you. So we continue to the question number 20. For this question, I will ask Ivan Kurniawan to answer it. Please, Ivan, can you hear me? Ivan Kurniawan?
Hello, Doctor.
Okay, yes, we can hear you.
Good morning, Prof. Cheng, lecturers, and doctors. Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Ivan Kurniawan from Faculty of Medicine, Diponegoro University. So for me, this statement, the central venous pressure is unaffected by respiratory activity is false, because CVP is increased by either an increase in venous blood volume or by a decrease in venous compliance. These two variables are not static, but dynamic with many factors influence such as cardiac output, respiratory activity, contraction of skeletal muscles, sympathetic vasoconstrictor tone, and hydrostatic force, and then respiratory activity. CVP is also increased during a forced expiration, particularly against a high resistance as occurs with a Valsalva maneuver due to external compression of the thoracic vena cava as intrapleural pressure rise. This mechanical compression is of the vena cava functionally reduce the compliance of the vena cava. That's all from me, Prof. Thank you, Prof.
Thank you, Ivan. Yeah. So yeah, so you've done your reading around. So just give one example is that when you take a deep inspiration, you actually lower the central venous pressure, and that favors a better venous return. So this is sometimes known as a respiratory pump effect. In other words, by deep inspiration during physical activity, you actually favor a better venous return because of the lower central venous pressure or right atrial pressure. And so obviously respiratory cycle and activity affects the central venous pressure. Thank you. Okay, 21.
Thank you, Prof.
Yes, for the last two questions will be continued by Dr. Tanjung. Please, Dr. Tanjung.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Gana. Good morning, Professor Cheng, Dr. Roni, and all the panelists. Thank you very much for the opportunity. So now we continue to the statement number 21. So I would like to let Nareswara to respond the statement. Please, Nareswara, can you hear me? Nareswara Ilham.
Hello, can you hear me, Doctor?
Hi, yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, Prof. Cheng, and the honorable lecturers and doctor, and fellow of my friends from the another Faculty of Medicine. I'm here. My name is Nares, representing Diponegoro University. It is such an honor to answer your question, number 21. So for me, the statement number 21 is hypoxia causes vasodilatation to lower PVR to increase pulmonary blood flow. So for this statement, my opinion is false because here's my reason. We know that hypoxia can be defined as a condition in which our body or a specific region of our body deprived or lack of adequate oxygen supply at the tissue level. So the concept of hypoxia will cause the constriction in pulmonary artery and dilatation in the systemic artery. So why can be like this? Because the first, hypoxia make the pulmonary arteries constrict because our body know that on the specific part of the lung, especially on the alveolus, there is not a good diffusion. So it will constrict and it will raising the PVR or pulmonary vascular resistance. So why this thing is happen because the blood will be focused on the other spot of the lungs which have a better or a normal oxygenation. So the hypoxia can be a counter. And then the second reason is hypoxia will make the systemic vascular dilatation because we know that hypoxia is a condition that lack of oxygen. And then so hopefully when the vascular systemic become larger and dilated, so the supply of the need of oxygen in the body will be fulfilled. So then conclusion is the statement is false because in the topic we focus on the lung. So hypoxia cause vasoconstriction and make the PVR higher. Okay, thank you, Prof. Cheng. That's all for me.
Thank you, Nareswara. Yeah. So this sentence highlight that the pulmonary blood vessels have a very unique response to hypoxia. In all the other arterioles in the body, the brain, the heart, they always vasodilate when there's hypoxia, which makes sense because that's for a metabolic reason. In the lungs, the pulmonary blood vessel responds to hypoxia by vasoconstricting. The purpose is slightly different. It's something to do with trying to better maintain a ventilation perfusion balance, as Nareswara mentioned. So this is sometimes called a pulmonary hypoxic vasoconstriction. And those of you who are interested, I just mentioned here in red, it actually involves something known as oxygen or ATP sensitive potassium channels. So that these channels are involved in this unique hypoxic pulmonary vasoconstriction. Okay, right, thank you. We move to the last sentence, 22.
Thank you, Prof. Cheng. And for the last statement, number 22, I'm going to invite Hans Julian to give a response. Please, Hans.
Hello, doctor, can you hear me?
Yes. Hi, Hans. Yes, we can hear you.
Good morning, Honorable Prof. Cheng, Honorable panelists, and fellow students from the Faculty of Medicine around the country. My name is Hans Julian Manuel, representing the Faculty of Medicine from Diponegoro University. So, on the last sentence, in the upright lungs, the perfusion driving pressure decreases from the base to apex of the lungs. Okay, so this concept is very complicated, so I'm going to try to explain it as concise and simple as I can. So in my opinion, this statement is false because let's first understand what the perfusion in the lung is. The perfusion in the lung refers to the flow of blood to alveolar capillaries. And there are three pressures present in this system. There are the arterial, the pulmonary arterial pressure, the venous pressure, and also the alveolar pressure. So the arterial venous driving pressure at each level of the upright lung is the same since gravity affects both the hydrostatic pressure at both arteries and the veins, which means that even though the levels are different, the driving pressure remains the same because the gravity affects both the artery and the vein, because both pressures are the ones that contributes the most to the driving pressure. However, the only thing that decreases in the lungs are the blood flow from the base to the apex of the lungs. This is because the upward force of the blood propulsion is decreased by the downward force of the gravity. So in conclusion, the sentence should either be in the upright lungs, the perfusion driving pressure remains the same from the base to the apex of the lungs, or in the upright lungs, the pulmonary blood flow decreases from the base to the apex of the lungs. That is all from me, Professor Cheng. Thank you.
Thank you, Julian. Yeah, so here we are talking about a driving pressure difference. So if it is just the arterial pressure, then we already mentioned in your textbook or lecture that because of gravity, there's a drop in the arterial pressure as you move from the base to the apex of the upright lung. But if it is driving pressure, we're talking about in red here, the difference between the arterial and the venous pressure. Since gravity will also affect both the arterial and venous pressure, the driving pressure actually remains unchanged. Okay, so the blood flow obviously is decreased because of the fact that there is another contributing pressure, which Julian mentioned as the air pressure in the alveoli, right? Okay, thank you. Let me just run through a few pictures and then pass the time back. So this is just to highlight hypoxia, that in histotoxic, as we have discussed, venous PO2 can go up. In hypoxic, that category of hypoxia, the arterial PO2 is decreased. Whereas in anemic hypoxia, the partial pressure of oxygen in the arterial blood remains unchanged. And this is what we've mentioned in discussing the question, that the rate of oxygen delivery in this free geometric diagram, mil of oxygen per minute, is dependent not only on oxygenation, but also on the cardiac output. And then this diagram is to highlight the point we made that hyperventilation during exercise in bold here is mainly to maintain a normal CO2 content. You are trying to prevent hypercapnia, not so much to increase oxygenation, okay, because of the unique property of hemoglobin to saturate oxygen, okay. And then, so the last few slides before we finish is to show you a representation of some of the universities and colleagues that I've been able to get to know. This is Dr. Hadian's office. When I went there for the conference, I went to his office and I hijacked his chair for this photograph. So this is his table, and you can see that he works very hard. So many paperwork here. This is Dr. Irfan from Srivijaya. This is the T-shirt with the slogan for the last IMSPQ in Jakarta. So he was very interested in this slogan and went back and made his own T-shirt. Physiology always in front. And then the back of the T-shirt is, what is this? Feedback. Physiology always in front. And the back is homeostasis, feedback. And then last two pictures, this is a couple of years ago in Udayana. I was invited to visit Dr. Mulyata and his colleagues. Susie is here. And the other two, I'm so sorry, I've forgotten the name. And this is the last, I think this is the 14th IMSPQ that was hosted in Yogyakarta by Dr. Danny and husband Dicky. And we had a guest here from Spain who actually came all the way for that quiz event. And then this is obviously my younger colleagues in University of Indonesia. And I like the slogan on their T-shirt. Maybe if I can expand this, it says here, physiologist, one who gets excited about things that no one cares about. I would like to change this to physiologist, one who gets excited about things that all medical students should care about. Okay, thank you very much. So this is the extra picture here. Okay, thank you very much for listening. Back to you, Dr. Ronnie.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Cheng and all friends from all the university. I'm very happy to see and hearing all the discussion, and I'm very happy that our young colleagues, friends, and then students from university in Indonesia are following your lecture well, and they give feedback and questions and answer to the trigger statement. I think it's quite well either. So without further ado, I know we already behind our schedule, so it's already late a little bit, but I would like to invite Dr. Ermita to give advices and her opinion about our guest lecture today, because it's initiated by Indonesian Physiology Society. Definitely I want to hear, because I do believe this is not the end. This is the first time, but it could be and will be. There is another section of guest lecture. But before we do further discuss, and I inform a little bit about the announcement, but I want to invite Dr. Ermita to come to the floor and give her advices and opinion. Please, Dr. Ermita, time is yours.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Ronnie. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon, Prof. Cheng and all participants. First of all, of course, I would like to give my greatest gratitude to our honorable guest lecturer today, Prof. Cheng Wei-Ming, for sparing your time for us today and giving a very great lecture for our students from around Indonesia, actually from 5 medical faculty. I hope you will be willing to give us another lecture in the future, because this is just the first one. To all participants, I would like to say that we are very lucky, because we can attend Prof. Cheng lecture about physiology of the respiratory system. Since we know he is a very exceptional lecturer, that he has an international reputation. And from the picture he saw us before, that we know he is very famous lecturer, especially around Indonesia. Yeah, you've been around, Prof. Cheng. I'm very thankful and excited that we are able to hold the mega lecture with an international lecturer. This is the first time for us to organize a mega lecture, and I'm very glad it went well, and I'm happy with the great discussion with the students, as Dr. Ronnie mentioned before. I hope all of you students can join us again in our next lecture. Further information regarding our next lecture will be posted on our website. Dr. Tutu or Prof. Fahmi, could you please give the link of IPS website in the chat box? Thank you. Oh, already there in the screen. Okay. In this opportunity, I would like to thank to all the one that support our event today. First one, to the IPS guest lecture team who work hard to prepare this event, chaired by Professor Ketut Tirtayasa from Udayana University, Bali, and he also the head of IPS Education Department. And my thanks to the chair of the 5 IPS branches from Bali, Palembang, Jakarta, Jogja, and Semarang, and also to the head and the respiratory physiology lecturers of the Department of Physiology from 5 medical faculties. And of course, to our sponsor for prepare awards for 3 best students, Elsevier Publisher, and moderator, great moderator for this afternoon, and for this morning and afternoon, Dr. Ronnie, the jury, the host and co-host, and of course to all participants who support us to so this event can be held this morning. Thank you very much. See you again in the next lecture with a different topic. Thank you, Prof. Cheng. Thank you. Thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam. Hatur nuhun. Thank you so much, Dr. Ermita. I said hatur nuhun in bahasa Sunda.
Thank you to all.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Project.
Professor Ketut.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you, Dr. Roni.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ermita. Thank you, Pak Tirta. Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Tanjung, Dr. Gana. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you all. Yeah. Thank you, Project. Yes. Thank you, Project. I'm sorry for my tables.
For the extended time.
Thank
you,
Prof. Saudari Dr. Irfan.
Ya, pasti Dr. Irfan. Ya, terima kasih. Kaosnya bagi-bagi Dr. Irfan, kaosnya.
Thank you, Dr. Roni.
Ya.
Ya, terima kasih Dr. Irmita.
Yeah. For Project, maybe you can share again the design of the t-shirts. Yeah. So we can, because it's good. I remember you share the design for the t-shirts.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Which one is this?
The design and also the t-shirt.
Yeah. Okay, I will send you the PowerPoint for the students.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Professor. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And then
thank you so much, Professor. Yeah.
Thank you, Prof.
Terima kasih. Thank you. Terima kasih. Jadi, mohon maaf ya. Terima kasih, Dr. Dewi.
Terima kasih semua. Terima kasih.
Terima kasih, Dr. Adi. Ya.
Dr. Denny.
Bagus banget ya. Terima kasih ya. Terima kasih, Dr. Rahma. Ya. Ada Dr. Budi.
Semua pemandu.
Dr. Agus Budi di chat.
Bantuannya sehingga acara bisa berlangsung.
Terima kasih semuanya.
Terima kasih.
Ya, ini first experience, tapi sudah lancar lah, Dok. Ini mudah-mudahan nanti lebih lancar lagi yang berikutnya.
Mudah-mudahan pesertanya bisa lebih banyak. Mestinya yang mendaftar jauh lebih banyak, tapi ternyata yang ikut.
Ya, biasa lah, Dok. Tadi.
Ada gangguan.
Iya.
Ya, nanti mungkin perlu kita bertemu evaluasi gitu.
Ya, betul. Ya, pasti ada yang kurang-kurang. Terima kasih.
Ya, mungkin kalau bisa nanti dihitung, Dok. Dokter Tutuk mungkin bisa menghitungkan persentase yang mendaftar dengan yang hadir, jadi biar bisa untuk feedback juga kita ke prodi dan ke fakultas.
Oke. Oke, terima kasih banyak semua.
Ya, terima kasih, Dok. Terima kasih, Prof. Matur nuwun. Ya, terima kasih, Dr. Roni. Terima kasih, Dr. Irfan. Ya, terima kasih semuanya. Ya, Dr. Tanjung, Dr. Gana, Dr. Denny. Terima kasih. Terima kasih. Ya, terima kasih, Prof. Ya.
Sama-sama.
Prof. Dewi, selamat ya, Prof. Selamat pelantikannya, Prof. Ya. Makan-makannya, Prof. Nanti, Prof.
Iya ya, harus itu ya.
Iya, Bro.
Udah lama nih nggak makan-makan nih.
Iya,
Prof. Dewi ini diam-diam.
Iya,
Namanya Prof. Tirta.
Ya.
Tapi kalau saya lebih senang saya masih seperti yang dulu.
Yang dulu gimana?
Yang dulu nama saya Dewi dan sekarang tetap Dewi.
Prof. Tirta tahu, Prof. Tirta yang tahu katanya.
Iya.
Lalu ya, Prof. Dewi. Masih ingat saya kah, Dr. Dewi?
Dr. Endang.
Masih lah.
Benda. Akhirnya bisa gak? Tadi Dr. Endang agak kesulitan masuk tadi.
Ya, masih banyak kesulitan masuk. Ya.
Dr. Ermita.
Ya, makasih.
Apa kabar, Dr. Endang?
Alhamdulillah baik, sehat ya.
Alhamdulillah.
Alumni COVID juga nih, tapi alhamdulillah.
Penyintas COVID ya. Aduh.
Dokter Endang Semarang, Dokter Dewi, ini angkatan-angkatan kita ini.
Angkatan ya.
Iya. Aduh, kangen loh, bener deh.
Iya, ketemu ya.
Oke. Sampai jumpa semuanya.
Sampai jumpa. Terima kasih, Prof.
Pamit.
Sama-sama, Terardia.
Terima kasih, Prof. Ya, masih Prof Tirta, masih Prof Dewi. Ya. Terima kasih. Ya. Dr. Minarma ini juga.
Ya.
Prof. Ya.
Wah, ini Dr. Minarma.
Iya. Iya.
Apa kabar semuanya? Ini lagi ngisi ini nih. Lagi ngisi angka.
Absen.
angka.
Oh, angka. Oke.
Kemana dikirim nih penilaiannya? Kemana dikirim?
Halo, ya.
Ke Dokter Ernita aja, Dok, mungkin Prof. Ya.
Nggih.
Ya.
Aku udah kirim, ini aku lagi coba isi lagi ya. Ya. Ke WA.
Ya. Dr. Madi, selamat siang. Ya, ya Bu Endang, terima kasih Dr. Endang. Ya.
Sama-sama.
Iya, terima kasih ya Bu Endang. Sehat selalu Bu Endang ya. Dr. Endang sehat selalu ya. Ya, terima kasih. Ya.
Mul, sukses Mul.
Terima kasih Prof.
Sukses Mul.
Iya. Ini kebetulan yang Dr. Endang sudah aman ya Dr. Endang, prosesi lo sudah aman.
Wah,
saya habis vaksin tiduran terus